Texas says a pilot not of this world lies in a tiny grave. Ohio's serpent seems to answer the sun, and maybe the stars. And at dusk, silver serpents raced the fields before airplanes existed. Are these just frontier stories, or a pattern? We can test. Tonight on CA Media, we label the evidence and run the demos, so you can decide. There's a way to watch a Western that most of us never learned. Not through the eyes of the lawman or the outlaw, but through the eyes of the sky. The American frontier, we're told, was cattle and timber, railheads and stagecoaches. Yet if you follow the older roads, newspaper clippings browned by time, oral histories told on porches, sacred mounds whose meanings outlived their builders, you run into a different West. A West of lights that moved in ways they shouldn't, of crash tales whispered across fence lines, of places where compasses jitter and stories lean upward when they talk about where we come from. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Tonight we put that West on the table and label the pieces so you always know what kind of story you're hearing. Consensus. The sober reads from geology, archaeology, history of newspapers, and the recorded limits of frontier technology. Speculation. The audacious reading that sees craft, intent, maybe even contact. We're not here to scold belief or hand you a verdict. We're here to compare claims, run simple demonstrations, and ask what evidence would actually change a skeptic's mind. 3 promised payoffs guide us. First, Aurora, Texas, a small cemetery, and a larger legend. An 1897 report that a strange craft hit a windmill in a small grave once marked a pilot not of this world. We'll separate what's recorded from what's remembered and show what non-invasive tests might clarify either way. Second, Serpent Mound, Ohio. A vast earthen serpent best understood from above, set in a landscape where some compasses twitch and some alignments seem to greet the sun. We'll demonstrate how magnetism can mislead or enlighten, and how to think about alignments without seeing patterns everywhere. Third, the silver serpents of the 1870s Midwest, dusk objects gleaming over fields. We'll try a sun glint, experiment and show why some sightings feel extraordinary even when the explanation is ordinary. Along the route, we'll pass through Palmyra, New York, where a faith story tells of a luminous messenger in golden plates, sacred to millions today, read by some through a cosmic lens, and Montana, where a frontier headline once called an exploding fireball a meteor ship, and a hunter tried to track the fragments. We'll keep our tone civil where faith is involved, and careful where indigenous sites and teachings are concerned. The goal isn't to win an argument. The goal is to leave you with better questions and with 3 honest lists. What happened? How consensus reads it, and what speculation suggests, plus the specific tests that would move the needle. One more promise about ethics. Cemeteries are not movie sets. Sacred mounds are not puzzles to pry open. Where we talk about ground, we talk about permission, non-invasive methods, and the difference between curiosity and intrusion. We can be curious without being careless. So saddle up, but look up. Because in this version of the West, the biggest frontier wasn't the desert or the mountains. It was the sky. If you stand at the gate of the Aurora Cemetery at first light, the date on the sign tells you 2 stories at once. 1, this is a real place, begun in the 1860s, where families come to remember. 2, a small plaque mentions a legend, an April 1897 newspaper report of a strange craft striking Judge Proctor's windmill, scattering debris, and leaving behind a pilot the reporter described as not of this world. Locals say a small grave once marked the spot. The headstone, people add, later vanished. Consensus begins with the medium itself. Late 19th century papers often prized spectacle. Balloons existed, meteors did too. An experimental device, a misidentified balloon or even a collapsing windmill could feed a headline that sold copies. Headstones go missing for ordinary reasons. Theft, weather, replacement. Cemetery boards deny exhumations for reasons that aren't conspiracies. Respect for families, policy, law. Speculation hears those points and doesn't let go of the oddness. If the report is accurate, a colliding object with a pilot in rural Texas in 1897 doesn't map to known aircraft because there weren't any. If there really was a small grave and a headstone, their absence now doesn't erase the story. It makes it itch. The tale persists across generations with enough detail to keep curiosity alive. So what moves this beyond campfire talk? Non-invasive tests. If the cemetery board permitted it, ground-penetrating radar could scan the reputed plot without disturbing a thing. A documented metal detector survey, run with site rules and mapped grid lines, could log any unusual readings. A quiet check of cemetery minutes and burial records might surface an entry that either grounds the legend or points elsewhere. None of this proves craft from beyond, but it can tell us if there is, or isn't, something under that patch of ground that matches the story's scale. In the meantime, we're careful with words. We say reported and alleged. We keep the camera respectful. Signage, the walkway, the distance you'd keep if you were visiting any loved one. In a mystery this old, the first thing to protect is the dignity of the living and the dead. The second is the method that keeps us honest. Walk a few hundred yards in the story and you reach a well, at least in the telling. One version says, debris from the crash was dumped there. Decades later, a property owner fell ill and blamed the water. Neighbors whispered about radiation or some unnatural toxin. Another version says a metal reading once registered near the site, and then, when researchers returned, it didn't. Legends don't stand still. They pick up details like burrs. Consensus asks the unglamorous questions first. Was water ever sampled with chain of custody? Were there control wells nearby? What metals or isotopes did labs test? Arthritis and related illnesses can appear for many reasons. After, therefore because, is a trap as old as logic itself. Wells can go bad from simple causes. A dead animal upstream, agricultural runoff, a failed lining. Speculation replies that the timing felt too sharp to ignore, and that unusual debris was noted around the same place at the start of the legend. Could radiation or heavy metals have been involved? Could a strange alloy, unknown locally, have left a trace strong enough to harm? There is a way to be fair to both instincts. You build a checklist and you stick to it. If permission and resources existed today, you'd log GPS points, draw a sampling plan, label sterile containers with time and temperature, and send them to 2 independent labs. You'd test for heavy metals, radionuclides if warranted, and you'd publish raw data with methods so others could review them. If that sounds boring, good. Boring is where truth likes to live. What about the claim that metal readings once showed something and later didn't? Instruments differ. Soil shifts. A detector can be set to one sensitivity on Monday and another on Friday. The cure for that problem is also boring. Document the model, the settings, the grid, the weather, and the exact path walked. Then another team repeats it. At the end of this beat, we're left with a story that could be tested. Not by trespass, not by prying up stones, but by the same patience we bring to any old. Strong claim, write it down, label the samples. Tell the truth about what we find, even if the truth is nothing much. From Texas, we jump to southern Ohio, where a vast serpent made of earth curves along a ridge. Its coils tighten and loosen. Its mouth opens toward an oval that some interpret as an egg. The place is called Serpent Mound, and you can only feel its full shape from above, or in your body, walking its length in a slow arc that rises and falls with the land. Consensus begins with a simple sentence. Indigenous peoples built this. Archaeology says so. Affiliated nations say so. The mound belongs to a ceremonial landscape with meanings layered across centuries. Compass needles can wobble in places with iron-rich soils or stones moved by glaciers. As for the sky, many earthworks encode solstices and horizon events. Observing the sun in seasons is human, not alien. Speculation doesn't deny any of that. It asks different questions. Why here, on ground linked to an ancient impact structure? Why this precise set of curves that some read as a sky map? Draco coiled above, as if the serpent on Earth answered the dragon in the north. And what about reports of magnetic oddities? Compasses that spin or stick, instruments that tickle the edge of sense. The honest thing to do is show, not tell. We wheel in a magnetometer and mark off 2 transects. One along the path by the coils, where permitted, another far enough away to count as baseline. The graphs are patient lines with small tremors. If the sightline jitters more than the baseline, we say so and propose natural reasons first. If it doesn't, we say that too. Awe doesn't need exaggeration to survive. Then we put the sky in play. On a clear night, we overlay a transparent grid, the kind any planetarium app can give you, and we line up the mound's major axes with sunrise and sunset around the solstices. If the fit is good, that's beautiful, not scandalous. Many cultures wove calendars into Earth. If the fit to Draco looks compelling, we explain a thing called multiple comparisons. If you try enough constellations, you can convince yourself the ground is answering any of them. The proper test is statistical. Pre-register what you're checking, then see if the match is better than chance. What does speculation have left then? Perhaps this: the feeling that some places hum, that design and geology amplify each other into something that asks to be read. You don't need aliens to keep that feeling. You only need respect, both for the people who made this place and for the math that keeps our wonder from drifting off the rails. We travel northeast to a cabin near Palmyra, New York, and to a story that millions hold sacred. In the Latter-day Saint tradition, a messenger named Moroni visited the young Joseph Smith and spoke of ancient plates. A translation would become scripture for a worldwide faith. That is a faith narrative, not a lab report. And the only right way to approach it is with care. Some modern readers look at the elements: luminous being, metallic plates, a commission to transmit knowledge, and see the shape of contact cast in older language. Could a story told in the forms of the early 19th century be describing an encounter of a different kind? Others respond that sacred experience isn't a puzzle to be relabeled. It is what believers say it is. The method that keeps us honest here is simple. We name what the story is, sacred history within a living religion, before we mention what some people think it resembles. We do not stage literal reenactments. We do not pour modern jargon into someone else's holy cup. If we speak of the sky at all, we do it by context. The era's fascination with signs and wonders, the frontier's habit of reading meaning in the heavens, and the way stories travel along familiar channels to become traditions. What would decide a cosmic reading one way or the other? In a scientific sense, nothing. Faith doesn't offer itself to that kind of test. But in a literary sense, we can trace motifs across time and place, messengers, plates, light, and note the rhymes without forcing a rhyme scheme where it doesn't belong. The value, for our purposes, is not to claim proof, but to say aloud that America's sky stories are plural. Some are sacred, some are sensational, some are both at once. At the end of this chapter, we leave Palmyra with what we brought: respect, and a reminder that not every light in the night is an instrument reading to be checked. Some are lamps people live by. Winter clung to the hills when a hunter in Montana told a story that made the papers. He saw a blazing object rip across the night, heard it break like iron struck by a giant hammer, and found a rock embedded in a slope where the forest burned. The headline called it a meteor ship. You can hear the editor's grin from a century away. Consensus points to an exploding bolide, a true meteor that fragments in the sky. Fireballs like that can spray glowing pieces across miles. They make sounds that tangle the mind: rolling booms, sharp cracks, the fizz of air torn and lit. A hunter tracking such a path at dawn might well find a hot stone in a newly burned patch and build a narration that fits the moment and the mood. Speculation keeps one eyebrow raised. Descriptions sometimes linger on machine-like details, the way the object broke apart in pieces that seem to steer, or the odd sheen of fragments that witnesses cannot later produce. The overlap with Blackfoot homelands invites a further layer: stories of sky people, teachings, not tabloids, told for reasons that have nothing to do with machines, but everything to do with meaning. The respectful path is to keep our categories clean. Newspaper-era accounts are what they are. Indigenous teachings are not ours to weaponize as proof. They're for listening. If a meteorite fragment with clear provenance sits in a museum drawer and matches a date and place, that's a data point. If not, we say the story remains a story, and we let it be as big as it needs to be without making it haul freight. It was never meant to carry. And so we look up again, westward now, toward a corridor, where reports began to stack in the 1870s, at the hour when the sun turns any moving thing into a mirror. The descriptions arrived in streaks and loops. Texas, Kansas, sometimes the stretch between: a silver serpent raced the fields at dusk, gleaming like a blade. It moved too quickly for the mind to mark, then was gone. Farmers pointed. Children cried. Someone said a snake made of light. A day later, a county away, a similar report surfaced. Consensus sits the witness on a fence post and draws a diagram. At low sun angles, ordinary objects, balloons, birds, even distant air debris, can flash like metal and seem to slide faster than they are. Without triangulation, two or more observers timing and angling the same object, you can't solve for altitude or speed. Without altitude or speed, serpent becomes poetry with a shine. We run a glint experiment to show the trap. A reflective balloon rises on a line as the sun drops. At one angle, it's nothing. At another, it slashes the eye and seems to zip twice as fast as its string allows. We film a flock of birds turning. For a heartbeat, they become coins tossed in the air. Then they're birds again. Speculation hears the explanations and still wonders about the pattern. The way some reports hugged a root, or the way some witnesses swore the object tracked the fields with intention. If there was no aircraft in the sky, if the weather didn't favor mirage, what was it they saw that made older men stare like boys? There is a way, even for old cases, to hold the door open. We log the dates and places that cluster, and we ask anyone with family letters or diaries to check the attic. In new cases, the path is clearer. Encourage multi-station recordings, phones at 2 points, clocks synchronized, stars or landmarks to set scale. A mystery that can be measured is a gift. And sometimes the measurement points back to the ordinary with a beauty that doesn't need the extraordinary to feel big. In the meantime, the phrase silver serpent earns its place in the lexicon. It names a mood as much as a sight. The moment when day dies and the sky tries one last trick. We spread our notes on a table and sort them into 3 neat piles: natural, cultural, extraterrestrial. Natural holds the bolide and the sun glint, the iron-rich soil and the changing weather. Cultural holds the newspaper era's appetite for spectacle, the faith. Narratives people live by, the indigenous astronomy that reads the horizon with ceremony and care. Extraterrestrial holds the craft hypothesis and the instinct that a pattern across space and time is more than coincidence. It's tempting to pick a pile and declare victory. But the truer thing is to ask which pile explains more with fewer extra assumptions. Often that's the natural cultural mix, but not always. Sometimes a story survives with a stiffness that suggests a bone inside it. Sometimes data, when we manage to collect any, leans toward we don't know with a firmness that is surprisingly satisfying. What keeps us from fooling ourselves is a small discipline. We pre-register what would count as a hit. We label speculation when we speculate. We admit when a demo, like a magnetometer pass or a glint experiment, only shows what can happen, not what did happen. And we resist the urge to make sacred stories do work they weren't told to do. If you want to test yourself, take the worksheet we've linked and rate each case 1 to 5 on 3 lines. How strong is the record? How strong is the natural cultural explanation? How tempting is the extraterrestrial read? And what new evidence would you require before you upgraded that temptation to belief? By the time we close the folder, the West has changed shape. It isn't less magical. It's more honest. It asks better questions. And it leaves us with one last list to make. Aurora, Texas gives us a newspaper report, a local tradition, and a cemetery that deserves quiet. The responsible path forward is simple and slow. If permitted, ground-penetrating radar over the reputed plot. A documented metal survey with a map and settings published. A check of minutes and records that might show a small burial without drama. If nothing turns up, the legend remains a legend. If something does, anomalies at depths that match a small grave, then the next steps are still ethical ones, taken in daylight. With the board and the families in the lead, the well and illness segment teaches us a different lesson. That good science is made of labels and patience. Chain of custody samples, controls, independent labs, published raw data. That's the backbone of any claim about water and health. Stories can point to a place, but only methods can carry the weight. Serpent Mound reminds us that awe and rigor are friends. The mound is indigenous built, and saying so does not shrink its wonder. It keeps our wonder honest. A magnetometer pass can show jitter. Geology often answers for it. A solstice alignment can be both sacred and human. If someone asks about Draco, the right reply is not a sneer, but a statistic. Pre-register what you're testing, then test it. The sky will reward respect with clarity. Palmyra sits in a different category entirely. It is a faith narrative. Some modern readers cast it as cosmic. Others do not. Our job is to present it with dignity, to note its motifs without claiming it for a thesis it doesn't claim for itself, and to let viewers draw the line between sacred and speculative for themselves. Montana's meteor ship and the silver serpents teach us how easily the sky can fool the eye, and how thrilling that can be. An exploding bolide can masquerade as machinery. A balloon or bird at the right angle can write its name in light. None of that diminishes the witnesses. It honors them by giving them the best explanations we have, and by telling them exactly what would change our minds. Triangulated angles and times, altitude estimates, fragments with provenance that survive scrutiny. If you're keeping score at home, notice the pattern in what counts. Documentation and repeatability. Non-invasive scans taken with permission, not rumors. Lab reports with method sections, not anecdotes. Comparative studies with statistics, not coincidences we fell in love with because they felt like poetry. The poetry can stay. The method must too. There's one last truth I want to leave in the air between us. You don't have to choose between wonder and restraint. The West is full of both. A windmill can host a legend without demanding a shovel. A mound can point to the sun without borrowing a spaceship. A hunter can tell a story that makes him feel 14 again without lying. And a viewer, you, can hold an open mind with a steady hand. The West becomes clearer when we agree on how to look. Legends aren't useless. They're starting points. Science isn't a buzzkill. It's a method. Episode 2 is about holding both truths at once. We show you how to separate record from retelling and how to test claims without trampling cemeteries or sacred ground. In Aurora, the mature move isn't a shovel. It's non-invasive GPR, a mapped metal survey, and an audit of burial records. At the well, rumor gives way to chain of custody samples and control sites. At Serpent Mound, wonder meets math, magnetics compared against a baseline, and sky alignments checked with pre-registered criteria so coincidence can't pretend to be destiny. For sky sightings, we trade adjectives for geometry, angles, timing, altitude, or we admit we don't know. This approach matters beyond UFOs. It's how we keep conversations civil where faith is involved, and how we honor indigenous builders without erasing their work with aliens did it. It's also how we avoid getting played by our own pattern-hungry brains. The big promise of this series isn't to prove or disprove contact. It's to protect curiosity with receipts. When you know the difference between consensus, speculation, and forensic context, mysteries stop being arguments and start being projects, things we can test together. If you leave this episode with one habit, let it be this. Ask what would change your mind, and make that test specific.